I got another job inquiry, in about I don't know, it was maybe 2 years. And it was to come back to Detroit. And
And a little station called, what's that station? I think WRIF. Isn't that the station? Am I thinking right?
Came to work with WRIF. And before I made up my mind, they invited me to come into town and meet Drew. And I just remember it was like right around, it was in November, and it was right around, I guess, Thanksgiving. And so I came in, and my parents lived in Ohio, so they met me up here and had dinner. And then the next day I went to hang out and meet Drew. And I just remember like being kind of uptight, like I wasn't sure where he was coming from and all of that. And
Right.
he was absolutely just the most, the most outgoing, fun, hilarious person. And, but first I'm like, oh God, where is this guy coming from? And he was asking me some of the bits that we did on the air in Boston. And so I'm telling him we used to do like a Dr. Kevorkian bit. And he goes, oh, I'm not judging you. I'm just trying to steal bits from you. And I was like, all right, I'm going to go along just fine. I like this.
These are questions that I had for later on when we come full circle, but I'm going to ask my Drew Lane questions now since you brought him up. I in 2000, well, I'll get to that in a second. For Drew Lane, I think if there's a Mount Rushmore for entertaining broadcasters, to me, he's on it. And I just want to ask you, from someone who's worked on it, I mean, he does so many, any one given topic in the hands of Drew Lane to me is like Play-Doh. He builds like 8 things with it before he puts it away. It's just, I don't think he gets enough respect for being a radio broadcaster. Getting to work, and the fact explain that.
Yeah, and it's never in the direction that you think it's going to go, or in the direction that any other radio show might take it. He has that gift of thinking about a thing from a different point of view. So, like a lot of people use prep services to do their show. Drew would never approach anything from that angle, and it was always the most unique look at a topic. And the other thing that he's just amazing at is interviewing people on the fly. I mean, he could always just roll with anybody on the phone. We have excerpts of the show that we use on the podcast, and I remember us talking to Gary Coleman, and he just he just wasn't having it, and it was another stupid radio show interrupting his job, and he just let us have it. And I just remember like Drew acting kind of wounded and affronted that he was mad, and then Clark, of course, wrapping it up with "you little."
Yeah, that was brilliant. That was brilliant radio. And if I'm not mistaken, that was they called him about the time that the Kid Rock video came out that he was in it, if I'm not mistaken. But I want to say, growing up in the Detroit area, that was you guys, the Drew and Mike show with Trudi Daniels, that was must listen to radio because every day was different. And and to me, the fact that Howard Stern never caught on in Detroit is because of the Drew and Mike show. Period. I mean, he blew up everywhere else except for here. Even when they brought him in at 97.1.
Right. And you know what? All the credit goes to the people who listened and how faithful and loyal they were. And I mean, to this day, you'll meet people who listened to us back then. They listened to the podcast. Now they'll show up at some of our events and they have their kids with them. Like, a guy who started listening with his mom and, or somebody who started listening with their dad, our show wasn't very clean, but
I don't think you could do it like that today. I don't know.
Maybe not. I don't know. Morning shows are kind of a different area. They're sort of a different animal. But yeah, sure. After the Super Bowl with Janet Jackson, they did clamp down on morning shows a bit. I don't know why we got in trouble for that, but we did.
That was weird. Radio got to blame for that. But if I'm in a bad mood and I need to laugh, I have it on my computer. I pull up the Belfort Blows clip. To me, that was the funniest fucking thing I had ever heard. I mean, that was the kind of stuff that pull over the side of the road, whether it be Kramer Blows. Belfort Blows, arguably probably the best one, just because I mean, just whoever was ringing that bell, It was just like a comedy orgasmic experience. It's like ding, Belfer blows, ding, ding. But yeah, it was brilliant radio. But that was just one. The Harrises, the Harris. Oh my gosh, I still remember on April Fools when he gave him shit like, "Why the fuck are you still calling me? What do you have nothing better to?" You remember that when he gave him the business and they were like, and I don't know, Drew might have been acting, but to me it was like he chastised them. They're like, "Well, we just thought you enjoyed these conversations like we did," but it was brilliant. But stuff like that. It was, and you never knew day in, day out what was gonna be funny, but you knew if you tuned into 101.1, you're gonna laugh your ass off.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was entirely organic too. No one pre-wrote anything. We all acted as an ensemble, and yeah, I mean, there were certain things that were pre-recorded. Of course, you remember Cliff Notes Theater, all those brilliant productions that were put together. But yeah, it was.
And I want to bring up, I want to bring up something that you actually brought to the table, because I mean, it's not a second thought now, but at the time, you know, I think it's depicted in Howard Stern's movie, speaking of him, but it was not that common for the news people to talk to the disc jockeys. So right. it wasn't like you were stealing that's the way it was. That was different. Which leads me to my next question. When and how did you pair up with Drew and Mike? And how long before you guys, okay, this format that we're doing, rinse, repeat, just keep doing it over. When did you realize, okay, this is how we're supposed to do it?
Well, that was an evolution, actually. I hooked up with them in 91. They had been at it and it was True and Zip, and they'd been at it for a couple of months before I came in. And they, and again, you know, because Lynn Woodison didn't want to do it, I got that job. It's always because right. Somebody in the news person role was going on to something else moving forward, and I got the gig. But but we first started out playing more music than we did bits, and it was a while too before I feel like Detroit was ready to accept us. But I remember being at a St. Patrick's Day party. It may have been that same March in like 1991. I came in January, and we were downriver at a bar, and all of a sudden we heard people like yelling out drops and stuff, you know, like we had used on the show. And it was like, oh, right. Wow, okay, they're on board. And it was that kind of loyalty to, you know, the show, listening to the show and then repeating it back and being on board with all the bits. And I realized that we were there. And then we did the show for quite a while. And then little by little, my news just started to be part of it because, you know, like it sort of interacted. It wasn't just a news segment, but they interacted. And I always kind of look for things like that anyway. You know,